Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our virtual rally for New York's children streaming live via CCC's website. We'll be starting just a moment, but before we do, I wanted to share some ways you can engage in the live stream. Right below or next to your live stream that you're viewing on our website, you can use the chat to send us a message or a question if you'd like to engage us in the chat room. We'll also be sending you links in the chat so you can take action and send messages to our New York State legislators and leaders. And note that to engage in the chat, you'll be needing to log into a Gmail or a YouTube account. But in the event you do not have a Gmail or YouTube account, you can also send a question or comment in the form right below the video. Again, if there are any technical issues, we'll be sure to respond to them as fast as possible. But sit tight, and we hope you are energized by our rally today. Thank you.
Great. So I guess I'll get started. My name is Jennifer March. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Committee for Children. I'm glad we're all gathered here today. As you probably know by now, CCC is a New York City-based child advocacy organization that works to ensure that all New York's children and their families are healthy, housed, educated, and safe. Our research, civic engagement, and advocacy helps to shine a light on policy, budget, and legislative solutions that are needed to build equity and improve well-being for all New York's children and their families. Since March, CCC has had a laser focus on the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has heightened disparities, long unaddressed needs of children and families and communities, and addressing them requires significant action and investment. Our recent analysis of child and family well-being across New York State's 62 counties shows that even before the pandemic, far too many children and families were struggling. Throughout the state and its counties, families are grappling with poverty, housing insecurity, poor health, education, youth, and community outcomes. And there's no question that the state is facing crippling budget gaps that must be addressed. But we also know that austerity measures and cost shifts to municipalities and counties will only worsen the impact of the health and economic crisis that we're in the midst of, and will have a particularly profound and negative impact on Black, Latino, and immigrant households, and ultimately prevent further recovery. And so while the challenges that New York State faces are significant, we come together today to recognize that in fact there are solutions, and we all have the information we need to guide us on the path forward. Today, we're calling on New York State leaders in the Senate, Assembly, and the governor to put children and families first in the fiscal 2022 budget. New York's budget must protect and prioritize investments that will promote equity and recovery and improve the well-being and address the heightened needs that New Yorkers, our children and families, are experiencing. CCC's state agenda outlines a series of priorities that we need to pay attention to now. I'm going to name a few of them, and we'll have speakers that address each of them throughout the next hour. We are, in order to recover from this crisis, we're prioritizing combating child poverty, restoring state reimbursement and child welfare funding, investing in youth justice programs, protecting public health programs, supporting mental health services for children and adolescents, investing in early intervention, early education and care, protecting education resources, and last but not least, expanding access to rent subsidies and housing supports for families. Over the next hour, you're going to hear from CCC staff, fellow advocates, and professionals from some of our partner organizations who have joined us today to call attention to the ways that the pandemic has heightened the needs of children and families, and how the budget and legislative solutions can actually promote recovery and well-being. We'll also be sharing opportunities to join us in advocacy, to encourage you to write your elected leaders in the Senate and Assembly and the governor. And if you're watching from CCC's website, you can scroll down to find the links to take action, and we'll also be dropping the links in the chat box. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Assemblymember Andrew Heastie, the chair of the Assembly Committee on Children and Families. He's a longtime friend of CCC and a champion for New York's children and families, and has done incredible work with us to make New York a better place for all children. So I'm going to turn it over to Assemblymember Heastie.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's an honor to be here. Good morning, everybody. So I am going to talk a little bit about the state budget, but before I do, I'd like to just give some context, but starting with thanking CCC and Jennifer for their guidance and their friendship and all of their work. We have worked on many issues in the past, and we're going to have to work together because this is as I see it, a exciting time because there's a lot of opportunity, but it's also a dangerous time, and I'll explain why. So I took over as chairman of the Assembly's Standing Committee on Children and Families, it's an honor and privilege that the speaker allowed me to do it, but the purpose for me is to focus the rest of my career on childhood trauma. Childhood trauma is the most important public policy that we can focus on. It is the linchpin for almost all of our societal problems. And if we don't do anything about it, certainly considering COVID, things are going to get a lot worse for kids, families, and certainly the taxpayers who are going to have to pay for services. And I'll get to that in a minute. So I am a firm believer that public enemy number one is childhood trauma. So what do you do about that? First, you invest in programs that prevent childhood trauma, some of them like childcare, early intervention, all the ones that Jennifer mentioned. That's the smart move, because if you don't, what's happening is you're going to potentially lose another generation who may be defined or doomed by that trauma and the ACEs that they've occurred. So now let me talk just context about COVID very quickly. COVID has been terrible for our children and families, absolutely terrible. I'm not going to tell everybody what their own experiences are, but I believe everybody's had a rough time. I can give you some general numbers. Due to COVID, there are now 325,000 children who are now at or near or below the poverty level that weren't there before. 4,000 kids have had their parents or caregivers die. We estimate that approximately 23% of those are headed towards foster care. Plus the disparities within communities, for Black and brown communities, you're exponentially more likely to get COVID and die from it if you come from a Black or brown community, and we need to address that. Now let me shift gears. That's the context. The governor's budget, there is one potential opportunity for us that I'm going to talk about in a second, and I'll end with that. And then the rest of it, I really don't like the governor's budget. And it is not sound fiscal policy, and it's not morally a good document because you want your budget to be a reflection of your values. So what the governor's budget does is, instead of acknowledging that we have many more kids and families who are in trouble, we're going to come in with extra resources. They don't do that. What the governor's budget proposes is a 5% cut to preventative services, which are exactly what you don't want to do for a variety of reasons. Let me start with this. Number one, your counties are going to have to pick up the costs. So for my local friends, the governor and the state are saying, we're not even going to pay for what we did last year. We're going to go 5% short of that. Second, these programs are what prevent and mitigate the effects of trauma. They provide the protective factors that families need to survive the tough time through COVID. So we're not only saying we're not going to help all of the new kids and families that were hurt, we're saying we're not even going to help all the ones we were helping before. And the consequence of that is these kids are exponentially more likely to be doomed or defined by their ACEs. Now, what does that mean? If you have experienced trauma as a kid, your executive function skill sets could be changed, because what's happening is every time your stress hormones are triggered and you have a fight or flight mechanism, the stress hormone cortisol affects the functioning and development of the brain. Now, this doesn't affect the kids, how smart they are, but it affects their ability to plan, their ability to regulate, self-regulate, their ability, a variety of other abilities. So it causes kids to have trouble getting through school. So what happens to these kids? They are exponentially more likely to wind up in the criminal justice system, exponentially more likely to wind up having trouble in school, exponentially more likely to wind up on alcohol and substance abuse, suicide, health problems ranging from higher asthma rates to everything else. So now let me go back again. What's the cause of all this? Childhood trauma. So what should a good budget do? You heavily invest in those services, and the governor's budget doesn't do that. And we're going to fight him tooth and nail to make sure we do that for those kids, for those families, for everybody who suffered for COVID, and for counties. Now that's the bad stuff. The good stuff is there is an opportunity that we have because the federal government came through with $469 million for childcare that we have on hand. Tomorrow, the 25th, New York State is going to give out a plan to try to spend that money. And then I believe there's more money coming from the federal government. I hope close to another $1 billion for childcare, maybe more. And the smart move would be to reinvest that money, to give money to providers who've been struggling and suffering during this pandemic, and to families, essential workers, and others who are at the lower end of the poverty scale. We've adopted a full program to revamp the child care system because child care has not been changed since the 1970s. And there are huge gaps in our system that prevent it from being given out equally and achieving the goals that we want. Everybody wants us to succeed here, including the governor, myself, everybody at CCC, and all my colleagues. But we have to make sure in the next couple of weeks that we seize the opportunity for childcare and we stand firm and do not allow these very, very bad idea cuts. That's really not the best way to phrase it, but these cuts that are a horrible idea to go through. So that's why I took this chairmanship. That's what I'm committed to doing. And I believe that we are on the path to stopping the bad actions of the governor's executive budget from becoming a reality for the rest of the kids in New York State. So again, for all my friends at CCC, I'm honored to be here. I look forward to learning from you and fighting alongside you. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. We are looking forward to partnering with you on these important issues. We're so thankful for your leadership, and we will continue to fight alongside you. Yes, you are right. We agree with you. This is a bad budget for children. I want to take some time this morning to talk about specifically child welfare services and youth justice. Please look forward to links on the chat to take action to restore cuts to child welfare funding and invest in youth justice programs. A little bit about child welfare. Child welfare preventive services in particular are critical to maintain child safety and to maintain family stability. We know that economic insecurity is incredibly interconnected with involvement in the child welfare system, and we're deeply concerned about the fact that during this unprecedented time, more than 300,000 children have been pushed to live in poverty or near poverty. We are concerned because preventive services programs have been a lifeline in responding to the deepened needs of families, providing anything from emergency cash assistance to food, to formula, to diapers. We know that this is the time to invest more in these types of programs, not to nickel and dime communities. Instead, the governor is proposing to cut child welfare services, including preventive services programs. And that would result in a 5% decrease in reimbursement to localities, resulting in a cut of $30.5 million. In addition, we strongly support a proposal to consolidate two very different funding streams that are aimed to prevent child welfare involvement and to divert youth who are at risk of justice systems involvement. I am so pleased to have Hawa Giabi today, supervisor at Good Shepherd Services North Bronx Family Center, a preventive services program at Good Shepherd Services, to really paint a picture for us about or on what families are facing and why preventive services are so important today. Hawa?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Hawa Jabi, and I am a supervisor at Good Shepherd Services at the North Bronx Family Center, which is a preventive service program of Good Shepherd Services. Good Shepherd Services has a network of preventive services in New York City that includes 4 programs in the Bronx and 4 in Brooklyn that support 850 families. We use 3 evidence-based models, which are solution-based casework, functional family therapy, and family treatment and rehabilitation. Once again, my name is Hawa Jabi, and I am a supervisor at North Bronx Family Center located in the Bronx. I have been in this position for a year and in the field for 4 years. I do this work because of the important role prevention services plays in families' lives. I have seen firsthand the impact and the highs that family experience because of our supports. As a trained social worker, safety, advocacy, and making sure that families are heard and that they have the tools that they need to be empowered is at the core of how I approach families. I am always here for them. In short, preventive services prioritizes keeping children at home and families together. We look for ways to advocate with and collaborate with families so they can be stable, safe, and utilize the tools they inherently have to keep their families intact. Families have it in them, and we believe in families' ability to succeed and prosper. This is important to name because institutional racism has impacted how families of color interact with the child welfare system and us as a result. We also know that historical racial injustice, and most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic, have exacerbated the conditions of the families we support. In the last few months, we have seen an increase in demand of food and other essential needs, as well as intimate partner violence. We have also been supporting families with remote learning challenges, especially for the families that experience challenges because of language barriers. Today, I want to share a story of a family I supported that has stayed with me throughout the years, which highlights the importance of preventive services in a family that had 3 children. When they were first referred by ACS to Good Shepherd Services, the mother feared that her children would be removed from the home. This was because one of the children was medically fragile and was left with the grandmother to care for her. This was a few days before the child was due for major surgery. When the grandmother took the child to the hospital, she was informed that they needed the necessary clearances to proceed. Since the mother was out of the country at the time, and the child needed this life-saving procedure, and the grandmother was not able to produce the clearances, ACS got involved. When I first met with the mother, it was my role to build trust and help her understand that while I understood why she was out of the country for an urgent matter, she needed to be here for her child to get urgent care. For 3 months, I reassured the mother that staying and caring for her child will keep her and her family together. At the end, the medical needs were met, and the family was able to stay together. This family continues to thrive. At the core of this story is that we value families and keeping them together. This story shows how quickly things got complicated from one decision that was made. We support these families by not casting judgment and by being respectful of the competing demands. I want to thank you for listening. You can help fight for the children and families we support in the Bronx by protecting funding for preventive services in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hawa, not only for joining us, but for the important work you do in the Bronx. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn now to speak a little bit about our fight to end child poverty. Please here too, make sure you take action to ensure we are able to pass key legislation that would help us make progress in the direction we need to go. Simply put, child poverty hurts children. The impact of economic insecurity can have a lasting impact on developmental outcome, health, and well-being well into adulthood. I already told you too many children have been pushed to poverty or near poverty after or during this pandemic. The fact is that before COVID, we had well over 800,000 children statewide live in households below the federal poverty level. 1 out of every 3 counties in New York has child poverty rates higher than the New York State average. And that's despite having 1 or 2 caregivers engaged in the labor workforce. We can do better than this. CCC has partnered with key fellow advocates and sector leaders to call attention to the need to end child poverty in New York. This is doable. We have an opportunity to pass legislation sponsored by Senator Ramos and Bronson, and that can be an important first step in that fight by making a commitment to end child poverty, cut child poverty in half by 2030. I'm so pleased that Norma Degante is able to join us today. She is a Children's Defense Fund New York Beat the Odds alumna and an advocate from Queens. She is currently a senior in college who is studying to become a counselor working with children. Norma, we're so excited to hear about your perspective and your experiences. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you everyone. My name is Norma. I was born and raised in Queens, New York City. I'm a 2017 Children's Defense Fund New York Beat the Odds Scholarship recipient. Thanks to the help of Children's Defense Fund New York, I've pursued a bachelor's degree and I'm currently a senior at Queens College. I am on track to graduate in the upcoming semester and I aspire to continue to going into graduate school in the fall of 2021. Growing up, the idea of going to college was foreign to me, and I didn't start thinking of college until I was in high school, and I received the support to realize this dream. My family struggled to make ends meet. Not only was college an unattainable expense at times, but even food and rent were too. My mother worked as a street vendor when she arrived in this country. At times, she wouldn't earn any profit because of the barriers she faced as an immigrant. I grew up wearing hand-me-down clothing from strangers and my siblings. Going to school, I knew I was different. There were moments where I felt we were the only ones struggling to access basic necessities. Like my family, there are thousands of families struggling to provide for their families today. They are fighting to pay for rent and put on some food on their table, to provide a safe environment for their children. It is outrageous that in 2021, families are fighting to feed, clothe, and shelter their children. We as a collective, as New Yorkers, are better than that. We need to do better for our children, their families, and our future. COVID-19 has further exacerbated its hardships for low-income families, especially housing and food insecurity. Throughout the pandemic, we were able to see who suffered the most and received the least help. For some, it is difficult to pay for rent when they can't provide a proper meal for their children. No family should have to choose between the two. In the middle of the global pandemic, my family and I had to move out where we were living. We had to rely on food pantries to have enough to eat, and we still do. If it weren't for the community resources, I have no idea where we would be right now. Families should have a stronger safety net, so they don't have to go through difficulties to meet their basic needs. Food and shelter are fundamental human rights, and we are failing each other if everyone is unable to meet their needs. My family and I were fortunate to receive the help we did. By being here and speaking about this problem, I hope to make a change because it is important to me and destigmatize poverty. Although we've normalized living in this constant struggle, this is not normal. Despite feeling like we are alone, the truth is we are not. Too many families live in poverty. We have to make necessary steps towards ending childhood poverty. I would like to use my voice so that children do not have to go through the same struggle of getting a meal or a safe home. If we tackle poverty, it can be a change for future generations to come. In doing so, we also help fix other social problems rooted in poverty, like violence. Helping children and families overcome poverty can be done by passing the Child Poverty Reduction Act. Passing Bill 2755 in the Senate and 1160 in the Assembly will enable us to move in a positive direction to end child poverty, and now is the time to start. So thank you for your time and for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Norma, for sharing your story and for being such a powerful advocate. It's really wonderful to have you here and advocating on these issues. So thank you so much. My name is Alice Buffkin. I'm the Director of Policy for Child and Adolescent Health at Citizens Committee for Children. And the next topic that I'm going to speak on with you about today is public health funding. And like my colleagues, I really urge you to take action through the links that are being shared through this live stream. We all know that our state, and especially New York City, is still digging itself out of a public health crisis unlike any we've seen before. New York City has been and sort of remains the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in the state, and protecting the city's public health infrastructure has never been more important. As Assemblymember Heastie referenced, more than 4,200 children have lost a parent or guardian to the virus, and 57% of those deaths were in 3 New York counties: Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. New York City's ability to meet the complex health needs of its community is really dependent on the city having the resources necessary to support communities that have been decimated by this crisis. Yet despite these ongoing challenges, the executive budget proposes over $1 billion in cuts and cost shifts to New York City and to the rest of the state, including in the areas of public health. These cuts include more than $334 million to safety net hospitals in the state that serve people who are low income or uninsured. These cuts also include cuts to a program known as Article 6 public health funding. Article 6 funds support a broad range of services, including immunizations, tuberculosis outreach, and sexual and reproductive health. They also impact community-based services, preventive services that address maternal and child health, mental health, substance use, and chronic diseases. These are services that are heavily accessed and relied on in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. We're asking you to help advocate by participating in our public health e-action linked in the live stream to urge our state leaders to oppose cuts to public health services and support those communities who have experienced the greatest hardship during this pandemic. I'm now going to turn it over to Denise West, Deputy Executive Director of Brooklyn Perinatal Network. Brooklyn Perinatal Network is an organization committed to preventing and reducing infant and maternal illness and death through an array of medical services, care coordination, education, and social supports. Denise is an incredible advocate for families and their well-being, an incredible community partner who fights to make sure that communities have the resources they need. I'm going to turn it over to Denise to talk about what cuts to public health would mean for children, families, and communities.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm Denise West, the Deputy Executive Director of Brooklyn Perinatal Network, who is celebrating its 34th year in existence, particularly focused on maternal child health and reducing maternal and infant mortality and morbidity. So this subject is dear to our hearts. Part of our work has always been in coordinating and working with other organizations. Hence, we know that one organization cannot do it alone. And if we at the community level can do that, then we also need government to recognize that funding needs to be coordinated, funding needs to be shared, city and state. Some of the services that BPN provides are the doula services, both birth and postpartum, a lot of health education out in the community. And so I'm going to talk about Brooklyn Perinatal Network, but other services that are also included in the Article 6 funding that this would impact: health education, service coordination, ensuring that services for parents, because we can't have healthy children if we don't have healthy parents. And so it is really important that we provide services for parents and that their services are not fragmented. So a lot of the work that we do with our partners is ensuring that if I don't have if I can't apply for health insurance for this family, I refer to another organization. So an individual is not further dealing with stress because they cannot get into services that they need. We also have breastfeeding workshops. The doula services that we offer ensures that families, moms, have healthy pregnancies, and then postpartumly that they are learning how to parent and that they will be able to really ensure that they have a healthy infant and healthy child. Some of the services that we also offer is health insurance enrollment. We enroll about 4,200 individuals a year. 60% of those are children. It's great to have health insurance, but what happens after that? They also need services. So we are ensuring that not only they have health insurance, but they use health insurance and their children get the services that they need. We found during COVID, it only exacerbated what was already happening. This is not something new. COVID just pulled back the drapes on the window and showed what it really looks like for Black and Brown communities. We have needed to do and find other resources to get food. Individuals and families did not have food. That was temporary that we were able to provide. We were able to provide vouchers of $100 per family, but that was a stopgap. That is not sustainable. We need funding that is sustainable. We had to provide clothing. We had to go to private foundations that was able to get clothing for children and infants because parents lost their jobs. They're not getting jobs. People are still fearful with COVID. Children are even fearful of being out in public. We had to do that. Diapers. Those are basic things that some of us are saying, oh, that's not important, that's minor. But for families that don't have diapers for their children, that causes other additional health problems. What we really need is to ensure that the communities that are already marginalized, the communities that do not have the resources that help them live, they're not even surviving, that they cannot be depleting in resources, that we must watch out for them. The temperature of any community is the health of the infant. If the infant is not healthy, then that whole community is not healthy. And so I would urge our funders to make sure that they not take away, but increase at minimum sustain funding for communities that are in need. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Denise, for your words today and for all the work that you do for New Yorkers. I think you really highlight how many needs there are out there, how intersecting they all are, and how we need every dollar available to help meet those needs. The next item that I want to touch on is related to children's behavioral health, which I think ties very much in many of those needs that Denise has just highlighted. Even before COVID-19, New York had a children's behavioral health crisis. In 2016, suicide was the second leading cause of death for New York children aged 15 to 19, and the third leading cause of death for children aged 5 to 14. About half of children in need of behavioral health supports were unable to access them. COVID-19 has only intensified these challenges, as children have faced nearly a year of anxiety, isolation, loss of loved ones, disconnection from school, and economic insecurity. We've seen the pandemic lead to declines in critical mental health services and access, even as rates of anxiety, depression, substance use, and suicidal ideation have risen. Children are facing unprecedented emotional distress, yet are unable to access the services they need, resulting in large increases of psychiatric distress, hospitalizations, and families waitlisted for services. This has really created a perfect storm that is impacting all children and disproportionately impacting low-income communities and families of color. There are steps, though, that we can take to address this crisis and support children and families. We just need commitment from the state. We need to push back on cuts that could impact mental health services, like reductions that have been proposed to local assistance and to the Community Mental Health Reinvestment Fund, which helps ensure mental health savings are reinvested into the community. We need to increase behavioral supports in the Child Health Plus program. We need to increase supports for young children and address the sources of trauma that Assemblymember Heastie laid out so clearly in his introduction. We also need to increase clinical and wraparound supports for students in schools, and we need to address the digital divide and the critical need to reach children and families with barriers accessing services. We are asking you to help advocate by participating in our behavioral health e-action linked in the live stream to urge our state leaders to support a continuum of behavioral health services to make sure children and families are able to recover and thrive. I'm so pleased to introduce our next speaker who can speak on some of these issues personally. Tuli Hanan is a youth advocate and peer trainer with CCC and organizes her peers around racial justice and immigration in her school and in her Queens community. She has been open to talking about her struggles with depression and anxiety and the challenges she faces in accessing mental health services. She's been open about these things to help others feel less alone, reduce stigma, and to make sure that people who make laws and budgets know that there's a human story behind the statistics and the line items. And she's here with us today to do just that. Tuli, I will go ahead and hand it over to you to speak.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking your time to come and join us here today. My name is Tuli Hanan. I'm a senior at Information Technology High School in Queens, and I'm a lifelong New Yorker. Mental health is something I want to discuss today. I had a chaotic childhood, moving from apartment to apartment, always on the go with my mom. In fact, my mom had me when she was 16 years old. She dropped out of high school so she can work and make sure I was well fed, clothed, and had a roof over my head. I grew up with the brutality of domestic violence, the trauma of poverty, and the pressure of succeeding as a brown Muslim female. I thought it was normal to witness fights, yelling, beating. Growing up wasn't easy. And it's hard not to get lost in my mind and visualize the memories I have that will never be forgotten. And I'm not here today to tell you a life-changing story about how I got the help I needed and my life changed for the better. I can't because I am still struggling today. I want help. I need help. But I can't seem to get access to quality care. It's either a very long wait list, a long commute, a doctor or counselor who moves on to another position after a while, or I am introduced to someone that doesn't understand me. Because I can't pay out of my pocket, it's very difficult for me to get the mental health services that are effective and accessible to me. It doesn't mean that I'll give up, though many times I've felt the need to give up and end my life. I accept that I'm not okay, and I see it as a strength. And I'm proud to say that I'm strong, but I need some help now. If you don't take care of your mental well-being, I myself can say that everything else in your life will slowly fall apart. I've lost so many opportunities, people, and even pieces of myself, and it's not okay. I want to gain myself back. Even better, I want to blossom and feel okay again. All my life, I've carried this anxiety and stress because I've held everything inside. But today I'm here to reach out for the help I know I deserve. The state and the city are supposed to help people like me get the resources we need to have access to in order to strive in our society. My name is Tuli Hanan. I am 18 years old, and I am struggling with depression and anxiety. Every day is a fight, and I'm ready to take on such course of actions to advocate for myself, even if I'm not okay. But that's the thing. Why do I have to fight so hard to reach the mental health services? I'm here to tell Governor Cuomo and the State Legislature not to cut funding for behavioral health services. Mine is just one story, a brief one. But I know there's so many young people out there like me who are counting on you to step in and make sure young people have what they need to thrive. Thank you.
No, thank you, Tuli. Those words are powerful. Thank you so much. We're always so grateful for your story, Tuli, for your advocacy, and we're ready to stand with you in that fight. I also want to say thank you to Assemblymember Heastie, Hawa, Norma, Denise for your words today. And thank you to all the CCC volunteers joining us. I'm Daryl Hornick-Becker, and I am a Policy and Advocacy Associate at CCC. And I'm here to talk about our education needs in the state budget, starting with early childhood education. Childcare is a universal necessity that is treated like a luxury. It is prohibitively expensive for so many working families, and yet its workforce, largely women and women of color, are grossly underpaid. And for decades, those who provide childcare have been operating with razor-thin margins despite their vital role in both the community and the economy. Well, the pandemic has compounded all of these problems into a perfect storm. And at a time we need childcare the most to keep people working, to raise children, to confront emotional trauma, providers are closing their doors, parents are leaving the workforce, and children are sitting at home. Fortunately, New York State currently has a tremendous opportunity to take action. We received nearly $470 million from the federal government in the December stimulus. And along with providers and partners across New York, we are calling on the state to use those funds to financially support providers, raise eligibility for subsidies, lower family copays, and adequately compensate the workforce. We finally have the money to do something. All we need now is the will from those in power to do it, to invest in children, working families, and the future of New York State. And you can join us in this fight. If you have not already done so, please fill out our early education take action linked in the chat or below on the live stream to write to your legislators today. On the K through 12 education side, the needs of New York students and schools have never been greater. The pandemic has disrupted the education of so many young people and exacerbated the inequities in our schools that were prevalent before the pandemic. The only way we can begin to address the needs and the inequities they've laid bare is by fully funding our schools. But New York State has never fully funded its schools. And now, on top of years of ignoring what is court mandated and constitutionally owed to students, the proposed executive budget cuts funding for schools by $1.3 billion, replacing that money with one-time federal funds. This not only deprives schools of the extra money they need right now to do things like support remote learning or provide mental health services, but also moves us away from foundation aid increases, setting us up for further reductions down the line and denying New York students what is rightfully theirs. We are calling on the state to fully restore the governor's proposed education cut, deliver all the federal funds to schools, and set us back on the path to foundation aid increases. Again, you can do your part here by filling out our education take action, again in the chat and on the website, and to contact your representatives and lend your voice to this fight. Finally, it is my privilege to introduce our next speaker. Edward Sanchez is a senior at Fort Hamilton High School. Go Tigers. He is a fellow Brooklynite. He has been a youth action member with CCC since he was a freshman and is one of our most staunch advocates for educational equity and opportunities for young people. I'm pretty sure he's gunning for my job. He's been to Albany several times advocating for foundation aid and has been involved in city campaigns around school diversity, the summer youth employment program, and after-school programs. Most recently, he has joined with a group of youth from across New York State to launch the Fund Ed New York campaign, which is calling on the governor to expand education funding to promote equity. He is here today advocating with ever more urgency, given that students need so much more in the wake of the pandemic. Edward, take it away.
Well, thank you and good morning. And I'm not taking your job, don't worry about that. I can never. Well, in my experience in the New York City public system, I mean, I've witnessed vast disparities in resources and opportunities given to students, depending on the school we go to or the district we live in. So many students in New York lack opportunities like arts programs, mental health supports, sports, tutoring, test prep, regents, and AP courses, leadership clubs, and more. Students in underfunded schools are at an unfair disadvantage compared to those in wealthier areas. It is not fair for only some students to have these programs and opportunities in a system where equity and quality of education across the board is a constitutional right that must be upheld. Without fair funding being allocated for students, this will not happen, and students won't get the educational opportunities we deserve, they deserve, and I deserve. As students, we felt the repercussions of underfunding in our schools every day before the pandemic. And now the impacts of isolation, trauma, and learning loss brought on by COVID-19 have made our needs even greater. However, many low-income school districts lack the funding for for social workers and other mental health supports to help students heal. We also need additional educational supports, such as tutoring and test prep, to help us get back on track after an incredibly disruptive school year. And it will come as no surprise to learn that Black, Indigenous, and other students of color disproportionately bear the burden of those insufficient support systems, exacerbating inequities that have resulted from systemic racism. Every student in New York deserves a quality education, a supportive school environment that meets all of our needs, and opportunities to explore our interests. Without larger investments from the state, poor districts will continue to be underfunded, and the students who live there will not receive the education we deserve. Thank you for listening and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Edward, and to all our speakers for joining us. We'll be wrapping up. Sorry about that, guys. We'll be wrapping up talking about our efforts to combat and end family homelessness. We are deeply concerned about a real risk of increased housing instability. We heard already from our speaker, Tuli, the intersection, right, between housing security and well-being for children. It's a real fact that 43% of the New York population are renters, and 1 out of every 3 households is severely rent burdened. meaning that 50% of their income goes to cover the rent. There's an eviction moratorium in place at the moment that's really preventing a spike in the number of families with children seeking shelter. But once that's lifted, there will be an increase and a surge in the number of families experiencing homelessness. This is why CCC has been continues to advocate for a statewide rent subsidy. We know subsidies are an important tool in preventing family homelessness and in ensuring that we have rent assistance in the short term and the long term. I'm joined today by Khadijah Davis, who is a fellow at the Family Homelessness Coalition, which CCC is a co-leader in. She is a mom of a 5-year-old daughter, a YouTuber, and a social media advocate for the homeless, and wants to make a difference in the world. Khadijah, thank you for joining us today. We are excited to hear about your experience.
Hi, all. As she said before, I'm a mom of a 5-year-old daughter. And before COVID happened, many families in New York were struggling day to day. I am one of them. I'm the face of, honestly, homelessness, because I was homeless at one point with my daughter. And with COVID, we saw a drastic change on how things were. People probably were ignoring it before. With COVID, it kind of put it in your face that something is really wrong. You couldn't ignore it because so many people were dying, so people were suffering, so many people didn't have food, so people didn't have clothes. And it's kind of sad that a dramatic event has to happen for somebody to open up their eyes to even see that there's a problem. The problem was always there. The problem was always there. And sorry, I have my daughter. The problem was always there, but we just have to see it, open our eyes. I might not look like a homeless person. I might not look like a person who's been through something, but I am. I'm the person who represents families in New York City. It was a time that I had nothing. It was a time that I didn't know where to go. And honestly, funding in New York City, if it was more than it was, I would have had better resources to help me and my family. With COVID, a lot of things has been struggling. Students has been struggling. Sorry, my daughter, sorry. Students has been struggling. As you can see, kids are at home while we have to be doing business online. As you can see, it's just real life, you know what I'm saying? So if we had better resources with schools, if we had better resources with housing, some of these problems wouldn't have happened, sorry. With COVID, we should have been better prepared, and we weren't. And the reason why we were better prepared for these situations is because we didn't have the funding from before. So since we have the problem now and we see the problem, we're in the problem, and we see that it's tearing families apart. People are dying, people don't have food, people don't have these things. If you give us more resources so we can help our communities from dying within and making sure that our future is very, sorry, let me go, baby. You see that our future is being impacted by this problem. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. As you can see, having a child at home, it can be disruptive to your life, but what can you do about it? This is how my real life is. I have a child and certain things do happen, but I'm just asking for funding for the families like me who might not even have a voice to do this. I go on YouTube and I talk about my problems every day to the world. Not everybody have that opportunity to do that. Everybody is not, open to do things like that. I'm okay with putting myself out there and being a face of the poverty level. I'm under the poverty level since I was 18, to be honest, even younger. And I'm one of the people who are affected by those things. And with COVID, it has turned my life upside down. But at the end of the day, you have to make it through. And I do get government assistance, but some things have, it needs to be going up. But everything, the prices of food going up, that means food stamps need to go up. If rent is going up, and if people say it's stable, some people are not. People talk to me all the time about how their rent is going up, how they're getting evicted. You would think with the rules in place that things are not happening, but people still are going homeless. People are still going on the street. And if they had better resources and better things out there for them, they would have to go through these problems. So I'm just asking you to help families, help people like me who didn't honestly have to go through these problems if they had more things out there for us to help ourselves. And that's what I'm gonna say. Help the people. We are the people, and we are the people who put you in office and things like that. So help us be great. Help our children be great. We want to see them have better lives, and we can only do it with resources. And they don't have the resources, they're not going to succeed in life. And we don't want to see that happen. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Khadisha, so much for continuing to share your story and for shining a light on the urgent need to take action at the state and city level to ensure that we prevent a surge on family homelessness. As we've heard over the past hour, there are many important opportunities in the state budget to invest in the long-term recovery of children and families and help them overcome the ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic and economic decline. We hope you will continue to advocate with us in the coming weeks as decisions are made about the state budget for fiscal 2022. Before we close, there's one final action I would encourage you to make. As you've heard throughout the discussion today, the state of New York is really in dire fiscal straits because of the economic decline that's been triggered by the pandemic. The federal government at this moment is robustly debating a stimulus plan that has the potential to actually provide significant direct aid to the state of New York and the city of New York, as well as invest in other critical supports for children and families. So we're going to place in the chat, and you can find on our website, the opportunity to take action to have your federal leaders understand that passage of the stimulus bill is also essential as we move forward in New York State and New York City towards recovery. The COVID relief plan offers not only long overdue direct state municipal aid, but it also, you may have been reading, advances policies that would lift incomes, combat child poverty, improve health and education outcomes, and help get people back to work. So again, Carlos is going to drop a link to the federal action in the chat, and you can also find it on our website. I want to thank each and every one of our speakers today for joining us and urging the state legislature and Governor Cuomo to pass a budget that recognizes the fundamental rights of all children and their families and focuses on creating a budget that would create a path to recovery in the aftermath of the pandemic. I want to give a shout out to Assemblymember Andrew Heastie, Chair of the Children and Families Committee, to Hawa, Norma, Denise, Tuli, Edward, Khadisha, and of course to my own team at CCC, Risa, Daryl, Alice, and behind the scenes civics team, Alicia, Laura, Carlos, and Robert. Together, we can actually make a difference. I'm a true believer in there being strength in numbers. There's a lot of work to be done, and we're hopeful that together we can ensure that New York State has the resources needed to ensure that all children and their families not only recover from this crisis, but they thrive. I want to thank you for standing with CCC today and every day. I applaud your advocacy, and would just like to say thank you for joining us, and let's keep up the good work. Take care.